Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dimitrios Pakis, and I'm a professor of economics here at Eastern Connecticut State University. My role here today is to make this event run smoothly so that both the presenters and those in attendance may have a worthwhile experience. Let me say a couple of words about the Eastern Fellows Program that was established in 2009, making this the 6th class of Eastern Fellows. The program was established to recognize and engage distinguished Eastern alumni in the life of the university. From past experience, we know that the students' educational experience is enriched from having our distinguished alumni come to campus to share their work experiences with the students. Today, we have with us two very special individuals, Mr. William Kelly, class of 1982, and Dr. Robert Hacker, class of 1986. A couple hours ago, they were inducted to this Fellows Program. Bill Kelly has had an illustrious career in the financial sector. Currently, he holds major titles and important high-level responsibilities at the Bank New York Mellon. Rob Hacker's lengthy and successful career in dentistry has enabled him to give back to those less fortunate around the world. In a minute, you'll have an opportunity to hear from both of them about their world travels, their professional responsibilities, and career paths. Both of our alumni graduated from Eastern when Eastern was a much smaller university. In the years since their graduation, Eastern has prospered and has grown in numbers and reputation. Much of Eastern's success is a reflection of the success of its graduates. In fact, if you look at your program, we hope that years down the road, your names will be added to this list of Eastern Fellows. You might wonder why busy and accomplished alumni will take their time to give back to current students at the university. You'll have to ask them. But I have an educated hunch that has to do with the special bonds and friendships they formed with classmates and professors and the learning they acquired during their Eastern education. I want to assure them and all of you that Eastern was and will continue to be the warm and caring place where young men and women come to learn and be challenged so they may grow personally and intellectually. The bios of our presenters are rich with personal achievements, and I would like them to take a few minutes to discuss with you their career paths, challenges, and accomplishments. After their presentations, members of the audience can ask questions. But I wish to recognize at this moment a number of family members who are sitting with us who came to partake in their induction to the Eastern Fellows Program. So what I would like to do, you have the program in front of you. You can read their bios. In fact, they're nothing but a summary of what they've accomplished in their lives. And the way I'd like to proceed with the program is to ask and move quickly through the program, ask a few questions, and we're going to take turn first with Bill, and first with Rob, and then Bill. And then I hope we're going to have enough time so you can ask questions, okay? So I asked Bill a while ago, how would you like to have this program? He says, make it conversational. So that's the way we're going to do it. So let's start with Rob, and I'd like to ask the question, is there a way for you to discuss your path after graduation from Eastern, your professional career path?
After Eastern. Now, that's out of order.
Yeah,
I had my sheet already.
Well, let me go back to your question. Which one was it?
That's fine. I got it. Okay, so I'm going to start with just towards the end of my career at Eastern. I'll read, and I'm also, I'll answer questions. Fall of my senior year, I applied to several dental schools. I went through the interview process, and I received acceptances from quite a few of them. I credit the strong reputation of the biology department at Eastern. I was very, actually kind of surprised that I was choosing between schools like Tufts, Georgetown, UPenn, Columbia, and a few others. I ultimately decided to attend Tufts. And when I was first admitted, I was a bit intimidated. The class list came out, and I was still at home, and I was looking through it, and I was looking at the first guy there, and it said, oh, he went to Yale, okay. And then the next one, Cornell, all right. Next one, University of Chicago. Next one, Harvard. And I'm thinking, this is gonna be hard. Crap, you know, I'm worried. So seeing all these Ivy League schools and these most competitive universities, it just made me nervous about the competition that I was going to be up against. I quickly realized that Eastern had prepared me well. I had a solid knowledge of the basic sciences, and these are classes that you take as a freshman and sophomore. Dr. Wynn taught General Chem, Dr. Wright, Orgo, Mr. Swanson taught physics, Dr. Shapiro, intro to bio, Dr. Gable taught us how to memorize in taxonomy, and Dr. Harkness in calculus. This is a team that not only got me to the top dental school in the country, but prepared me to compete with students from other top universities from around the country and from all over the world. So after a few months, I felt comfortable, and then I was pleasantly surprised again. During the first year of dental school, you don't work on humans, which is good, and thank God for that. You take preclinical laboratory work, and what happens there is you're given blocks of wax, and you carve teeth out of the wax. And I was actually feeling like I was one of the better students in the preclinical area because I was very good at carving wax teeth. And I thought back and realized that yet again, Eastern had prepared me well because as a sophomore, I was given the opportunity to take sculpture classes. And I took the first sculpture class one semester and found that I really look forward to going to that class 3 days a week. I couldn't wait to go after and work on my pieces. And I really enjoyed the class and ended up taking another one the next semester. Sculpture's not required in a bio major. You don't have to take it. I didn't need it to graduate. But I bring up this story to show you how important a liberal arts education is. You all know that Eastern is Connecticut's public liberal arts university. I'm sure they tell you that quite a bit. And I had the opportunity to take this sculpture class, and it really led me to excel in the preclinical. I know when you're trying to fulfill your requirements for your major, there are these annoying core classes that you all have to take. And this is where you'll find your sculpture class, your music class, your history class, if it's not your major. And I was a biology major by default because I needed all these classes to take the first 2 years. I figured I'd add a few more and I'd have my bio degree. But with the sculpture class, as I said, it really prepared me in dental school. But another class I had to take was a psychology class, and I was hooked on that immediately. So I ended up minoring in psychology. So these extra classes I took for my minor helped me relate to my patients, particularly early in my career. So I just would recommend take the opportunity it's given you to get yourself a well-rounded education and explore and be creative when picking your classes, because you never know where the benefits will show up in your life. These classes that you take are the ones that you'll be sitting around a table with friends talking about. It's really the interest that you have. I was able to play soccer at Eastern. I had enjoyed intramurals, but most importantly, I was blessed to meet my future wife, Ann. Ann and I were both biology majors, and Ann reaps the benefits in her career from her education like I do. Another experience that I will always fondly remember is Sunday evening church service with Father Larry. My roommate roommate asked me to go the first time, and I knew Father Larry was someone special. I encourage you to go to one of those services he keeps held. So I graduated from dental school in 1990 and went into private practice. I worked in several practices throughout the state, working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And I figured instead of enrolling in a practice residency in a hospital, I'd create my own residency. By working at several different dentists at the same time, this strategy worked out well for me, and within a few years I was able to purchase a practice from a retiring dentist. I feel that I couldn't have used this strategy had it not been the quality education from Tufts and the strong base from Eastern. I felt right from the start that if I stayed on the leading edge of technology and dentistry that I would be successful. Starting from a small practice in Brantford, my office now has 20 employees, 3 doctors, and we have the latest technology that dentistry has to offer. Like any business, a dental practice requires plenty of attention and tweaking. Continuing education plays a key role in my career and is important in showing my team that I'm an eager learner and a leader outside the office as well as inside. With my practice running smoothly and efficiently, it was time to give back. And 5 years ago, the opportunity came to me to help form a dental mission trip to Ecuador. The community we serve is very poor, and most had never been to a dentist in their lives. We packed our instruments and supplies and went down to serve. And remember those core classes. I wish I took Spanish because I didn't know what anyone was saying, but I learned. So we did a ton of dentistry, and we lived with the families we served. It was a great experience. In fact, I brought my daughter and my son, and now my daughter's planning on applying to dental school herself. Dentistry as a profession has been great to me and my family. I still enjoy going to my office, and I have a lot of freedom to spend with my kids. It was well worth the investment, 8 years, and now Tufts is $90,000 a year. But don't worry, because you're at Eastern, so you're saving a lot of money. You'll be ready. It's always great to advise and think of the future, but I would like to challenge you to think of the present and be present. Look around you at everything that's being offered to you. Be creative when you're putting together your course schedule. Read about subjects that you never thought you'd be interested in. Call Father Larry and visit him and have a talk. Play some intramurals, join a club, and do some mission work. And thank your mom and dad. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Let's move along the same way, and I know Rob covered a number of issues, including some recommendations and experiences and why the students should be taking liberal arts courses as well. I was going to ask that question, how important liberal arts education is. Let's move on to the Bill and give us your...
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Kelly, and I'd probably start by saying my path and route was probably a little more circuitous than Rob's in terms of where he knew he was going, perhaps, in terms of his aspirations regarding dentistry. I, perhaps, like many of you, arrived at school not knowing precisely what I wanted to do. And for those of you that read my bio, the activity that I'm involved in at the Bank of New York Mellon is a business called Securities Finance or Securities Lending, and it has a short-term fixed income asset management component to it. That probably makes sense to many of you. The securities lending part, perhaps not, because there's not a major, there's not a business, there's not an activity that says I'm going to grow up to be a securities lending professional. But the I guess, flexibility of an Eastern Foundation education prepared me to kind of look for things and opportunities that were available to me. So looking at and arriving at Eastern, I was a public policy and government major with the intention of becoming a lawyer. And really the law, as I got closer to analyzing it and the opportunities that it presented, I really looked at it and going, perhaps not for me. Perhaps not for me. And looking at the opportunities that Eastern offered with the minor, as Rob alluded to, I went a double major path. So I stayed with the public policy and government major, had terrific instructors, had terrific experiences in that discipline, but also branched out and took advantage of the other opportunities here. And that's where I became acquainted with Dr. Packus in 1978 and two of his colleagues in the economics department. So both of those majors together formed my foundation in areas of interest. And really marrying those two together, I think, formed the opportunities that were afforded me in the financial services industry. One area that I would draw upon in terms of looking at the public policy and government aspects were the internships that were available to candidates in that program, be they state legislative internships, national legislative internships, which my brother John, who's also a graduate, took advantage of here at Eastern. And marrying that with a business aspect was a very valuable experience for me, at least in terms of determining I didn't want to be a politician, I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I was interested in the business aspects of government, serving for a senator that worked on the appropriations and finance committees. That was a budgetary process. That was, I'll call it a financial aspect. And consequently, looking at the opportunities that were available at Eastern in terms of the leadership opportunities, I would encourage each of you in terms of the participation in the leadership opportunities to try to acquire those experiences as quickly as you can throughout your college experiences and throughout life in general. Those have served very, very well. Leadership is something that I think if you look at either clubs or communities, social clubs, intramurals, those are areas that are particularly valuable in terms of, I think, on a resume. If I'm looking at a resume, I look for leaders. And I'd say leadership qualifications, leadership activities are something that are extremely valuable and I think can serve you well in your community and professionally. I think in terms of my career path, what I did upon graduating Eastern, it was 1982, and so much like I think folks coming out recently post the financial crisis, is that the economy wasn't great in 1982. It wasn't a terrific economy to go looking for a job, and Rob and I have the soccer background, and I knew that the professional soccer career was not going to work out, but immediately upon graduation, I went down to Clemson University, spent a summer down there working soccer camps, went to Atlanta working soccer camps, went to the Canterbury School working soccer camps, and figured I'd just get the soccer kick out of me, which I accomplished, I think, quite readily, and I was ready to come back and start a career. Again, not exactly certain which career I would start. The economy not being terrific in 1982, jobs were tough to come by. So much like what's gone on the last couple of years with entry-level careers, a lot of graduate school and a lot of my colleagues went on to graduate school. Some of us were just really trying to get our feet on the ground. At that time, I became a permanent substitute in a middle school that I had attended and taught for a half year, while still continuing to look for what I determined was a career in financial services. So I ended up getting on with a small community bank downstate in Norwalk, Connecticut in the winter of 1982. So graduating in May of 82, the winter of 82, I get on with a small financial firm, Gateway Bank, actually South Norwalk Savings Bank it was then at the time. Spent a couple of years there, and what I would say in terms of what that launched me or be able to become my launching pad was the leadership opportunity and the management opportunity. With really no experience, a bank was growing, they needed some young talent. They saw talent in me for whatever reasons, I'm not really quite sure, but they took a chance on me. And really I think it was the foundation of Eastern, the ability to communicate effectively, the ability to have demonstrated leadership experience that they put me into a leadership position. And the bank was growing and we were doing a lot of exciting and new things. But I also recognize that my career is going to be a collection of experiences. It's going to be just really arrows in a quiver that are going to go in as I'm going to collect those experiences, be it at a firm or many firms. And I'll get on to the many firms in a moment. is that, so I spent 2.5 years at that firm running an operation, so typical deposit taking, savings accounts, technology, running that. But one area that was particularly attractive to me, and we were chatting, Rob's brother Dave and I were chatting about how impressive the computer and the technology is on the campus these days. I think back when we were here, it was Fortran and COBOL, and it was cards that you would run over in the evening. But the opportunity that was afforded with me with that rigorous background in technology was to insource and really put a technology platform in place for this small community bank and participate and lead that effort for that particular firm. And that was a great experience, and really it's pushing out beyond your comfort zone. It's not something you've maybe trained for, but if you've prepared yourself well with just multi-discipline thinking, have good people around you, have good support around you, and exercise good judgment, be a good listener. I'd always say just be a good listener. That's going to give you your best opportunities for success in those areas where maybe it's pushing out beyond your boundaries. And then subsequent to that, this was before I married my wife, who I also met at Eastern. There's a lot of commonality between the soccer and the spouses circling this table. So look to your left and your right. But just in terms of looking at an opportunity in Manhattan, saying I was living in Fairfield, and I was within walking distance of the train, and I said there was an opportunity, and what was going on in the markets at that particular moment was asset-backed securities, mortgage-backed securities. So my mortgage, my parents' mortgage, your parents' mortgage, at the time was being securitized, and there was this big bubble of activity, and they needed people's help. So I'll go in and help with that particular activity. So I get on a train and start commuting. I figure this will be a 2-year experiment, kind of having grown up in the Hartford area, not really having any desire to live in Manhattan. Well, 28 years later, I'm still doing that commute that I started 2 years ago, or had the intention of only being a 2-year commute. So that was a job, and that was an opportunity at Irving Trust. And then that led to an opportunity of getting into the mortgage-backed business, running a particular activity, and then really looking at what do I like to do. So now I'm learning and I'm acquiring skills that are in the financial services how do I leverage those? How do I create value for my career and the opportunities associated with that? And it's really looking at what am I attracted to, and it's really trying to figure out, this is operations, this is technology. I like those, I'm glad I did those, but I'm really interested in getting on the revenue side of the business. And so I had an opportunity from, again, a boss that I had who hired me at Irving Trust. He went subsequently over to Bankers Trust, brought me in to run a custody business. So that's basically sales and marketing to basically institutional investors that have their investment portfolios that need to be safe kept. So when they buy and sell securities, they need coupons paid or interest and dividends paid. We provide that service to pension funds, insurance companies, and other firms like that. And that was an opportunity to run a particular business. And then it just kept cascading from there in terms of that, having that success and that opportunity led to another opportunity on the short-term money management side, and just kept building out and acquiring those experiences. And really the valuable aspect associated with that and the opportunities afforded to me were fundamentally by keeping the network that you had established either through Eastern or through your professional ranks, and continuing to become associated, become active, and not isolated in your particular, I'll call it, department or activity, and have that desire and that burning desire to reach out beyond your comfort zone and your particular area, because it's easy to get settled in. But I think the opportunities of youth and the opportunities that are afforded to us as young professionals, I think, are really limitless. They're truly limitless. It's really I think we would limit ourselves probably more than firms would limit us, because even at our firm today, we're very encouraging. We have programs to try to get the high potential folks out into different areas and give them different experiences because they do represent the future leaders of the company. And then consequently, I go through and I ended up running a particular business at BNY Mellon. The securities lending business is, you've probably heard the term post the financial crisis of shadow banking. So those of you that are in the financials, either economics classes or business classes and all that's going on in shadow banking, securities lending is one of those 5 shadow banking activities. Bank of New York Mellon is the largest securities lender. I'm fortunate enough to have teams of people in Asia, London, Pittsburgh, Canada, and Toronto that service the clients that own or are the asset owners that basically earn incremental income on their otherwise idle investments through this securities lending activity and become a lubricant to the financial markets. So essentially, through really what I would call a modest beginning, probably modest at Eastern, modest through the couple of experiences that I had early on in my career, subsequent to folks taking a chance on me and me taking a chance on them and just really embracing those opportunities, maintaining those networks along the way, have given me and afforded me a terrific opportunity, a terrific career. And I was thinking about, just a collection of thoughts before arriving here, and I mentioned them to Dr. Packus. And if I look at, the paths and the historical events that I've had the good fortune to be associated with, or maybe not good fortune as the case might be, if I look at it that how Eastern had prepared me for professionally and just socially and just an awareness that those events cover the 1987 securities market crash. Where was I? I was on a plane to Tokyo with folks, and there was no internet at the time. The pilots were posting as the Dow Jones was descending. They rolled the beverage cart out, and that was 5 years post-graduation. So you go into other historic financial events. You have the Russian crisis, you have 9/11, you have 2008 and the financial crisis associated with that. And essentially, from really a modest beginnings here in Willimantic, Connecticut, that I've had the opportunity to participate or witness or be involved in at the epicenter of those historic events. And it's not something I've really thought much about until the opportunity was presented to come here. But I think in terms of what I would offer each of you in terms of my experience and what do I take away and what's the advice that I pass on to my children, what's the advice that I pass on to their friends. I think it's the networking, it's the opportunities that are afforded. I think folks in institutions like Eastern Connecticut to get active right out of the box, become a participant, become a leader, and I think acquire those leadership abilities and experiences as soon in your academic careers and in your professional careers as much as possible, and I think that will serve you well. I think the other aspect is I didn't know what I was going to do, but I can tell you I like doing what I do. Intellectually, I love it. Dr. Packus and a couple of his colleagues that are no longer with the institution, Dr. Parzik and Dr. Lombard, were tremendously influential in terms of stimulating my interest in the area of economics. John Dieritz and John Kovaldick were my favorite instructors, I guess if you can have favorites, in the area of public policy and government. And what I would say in terms of what I took away from what Dr. Kovaldick and John Dieritz and Dr. Packus and his colleagues was having high standards. Have the highest standards and expectations for yourselves, because they have nothing less but the highest expectations of how your performance in the classroom will translate into how you perform in your professional career, in society. Just have the highest standards in terms of the expectations. And the gentleman that I would say that probably hit me with a pail of water with respect to high standards was a gentleman that Rob was acquainted with and was my soccer coach here, a gentleman by the name of Jim Dyer. And my goodness, there was just no tolerance for anything other than the best standard. You showed up every day and you were prepared. And I think that translated into the performance in the classroom. That translated into, because if you didn't perform in the classroom, you didn't get the privilege to perform on the field. So I think all of those and I would just wrap it in a high standard, is probably the most valuable lesson that I took away from my experience at Eastern, in addition to, I think, the most multidisciplined approach and experiences that were afforded to me. So I'll pause there, Dr. Packus.
No, I want to follow up on the question. It's not all peaches and cream in your profession.
No.
If somebody wanted to go through and become a dentist or get into the financial industry business, what are the challenges that they will face today? What kind of a character do they need to have in order to make it, so to speak, in your field?
You might feel like taking the path that I did is like the safe way, because when you go to dental school, there's not a whole lot of things you're going to do besides be a dentist, and at the same token, you're committing 8 years of your life and a lot of money for tuition, depending on where you go. So you can consider that like the safe way. I know that dental schools now and medical schools are a lot more competitive than they were when I was applying, and so they're less tolerant of lower grades, lower test scores. So that's one issue. After you get out of the dental school, and if you're going into medicine, the Affordable Care Act is going to have a huge impact on your life. You just don't know it yet, and there's going to be, and no one really does, because no one really knows exactly what's in that law. As that law unfolds and becomes more evident, then you're going to start to see the challenges that are going to occur. So that's a huge hurdle that is going to have to be jumped.
I'll stay on the regulation theme. In terms of Rob's talking about just changes in laws, changes in probably the economic or the ecosystem associated with medical school and on to having a medical practice with the new Healthcare Act. Financial services is the same thing. So financial services is just inundated with regulation. And so what does that mean with respect to opportunities? So, do you think about banks and investment banks and asset managers in the same fashion that we all maybe homogenize those, and maybe from a career perspective, we probably painted them all with a single broad brush? I would say that probably needs to be looked at very, very differently. But I think in the same way that regulation can present challenges, it can present opportunities. So if I look at what are the growth areas in my firm, what are the growth areas in terms of careers, it's regulatory, it's compliance, it's audit. It doesn't sound glamorous, but I can tell you it would be a terrific foundation if you can help a firm navigate those. Those are probably, if I equate it to why did I end up in Manhattan, it was because of the mortgage-backed security bubble. Well, this is another bubble of sorts in terms of its regulatory. So what can I do? What does that mean in terms of opportunities if I'm interested in financial services? I think the other aspect, and this is something that I think represents a tremendous opportunity, and it's probably something more for your generation than perhaps mine, is big data. And how do you harvest and monetize big data? And what does that mean with respect to behavior? So if I look at our firm, we have 27% of the world's investable assets. We have 85% of the U.S. government securities clear through our wiring and plumbing every day. We have foreign exchange transactions that represent 14% of the world's activity. And you can go on and on and on and on and on. But you look at, so generally what our firms have done is just process that on behalf of clients. We haven't really tried to or attempted to, not so much monetize it, but understand the behaviors of who's buying a security, who's selling a security, why might that be occurring, Why is a foreign exchange transaction occurring? So the big data, the behavioral aspects associated with big data, and I think we've heard Jeff Bezos talk about it from Amazon and others, I think is an extraordinary opportunity. If anyone can figure it out, there's a tremendous, I'll call it field out there potentially for getting that right. So I think those two elements, I'd put regulation is a challenge, but I also think it's an opportunity. And I also think just in terms of big data is perhaps another opportunity for not only financial services, but I just think, I think in commerce in general, that big data is another area.
I know you mentioned both of you found the love of your lives here. You met your wives, and I know you have relatives who graduated from Eastern as well. But I was wondering if you can, one person that sticks out as somebody who influenced you from the university as a mentor, as an advisor, and so on, and why? I think you already mentioned your coach.
So in my instance, I'd say that there were many, including the moderator. But in terms of walking onto this campus, and at that moment, as a freshman, scared, frightened, not really knowing what to expect, recognizing that probably, and I didn't at the time, that you've got a couple-week head start on the rest of the freshmen that are soon to arrive with that same sentiment and probably fright, or maybe perhaps enthusiasm. That order and discipline that was afforded to me by Jim Dyer and the soccer coaches was a tremendous experience, and I think it just set a tone right out of the box for what my experience, both, again, what I would say, both on the field and in the classroom was to be like. And that led me to, so it'd be Jim Dyer if I were to say that, so it's hard to improve on first impressions, and he would be the first impression that I had here at Eastern.
Well, I had mentioned a kind of a team of the basic science instructors, professors, and as a team they were very influential to me. But I will tell a quick story about Dr. Gable, who he's a taxonomy professor, and that course is just basically memorizing tons of information. And but he also taught this course called scientific reference, which I know my wife took that class. You might have even been in the same one as me, but I don't think they teach anymore because it's kind of a library research class, and it's 1 credit, and everyone had to take it. And you basically had one project, and there was just an obscure piece of information that you had to go into the library and find. And he warned us that it wasn't going to be easy to find this piece of information, and it really was a meaningless piece of information, but it is in the library, and you had to figure it out with clues that he gave you and using the reference system in the library. He also warned us if we shared our information, we would get an F. So we're all working independently because, you're not allowed to share information, and no one could figure it out. And you could see who was in the class because they were running around looking at different parts of the library trying to figure out this thing that you were trying to find. So somehow I figured it out. So I figured out where to go. I went through the whole system in the library, and I found this piece of information. But I wrote it down wrong. So but I found it, and he could tell that I found it. But as I was walking out of the library, one of my classmates said, you look like you found it, because I was pretty happy with myself. And I said, yeah, I know where it is. I know how to find it. And he's like, you got to tell me. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you. No. Come on. And I said, all right, I'll just tell you this one part. So I told him this one part, which was a big mistake, because what happened was he followed the route that I took, and he wrote the wrong little piece of information, so we had 2 identical wrong answers, okay? So I get a notice from somebody, there wasn't any email or anything, so one of the classmates, Dr. Gabe wants to see you really bad, now. So I was like, oh, gee, so I went over and I saw him, and he's like, you got an F, if I failed you. I said, why? And he said, because you gave the answer to someone else. I said, no, I didn't. He asked me, and I told him, how to get it, but I didn't tell him what it was. He goes, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You failed. So I left. I was very upset, and the person I gave it to realized that he had pressured me, and I succumbed to the pressure, which, I really admire my kids because they never do. They're just really strong that way. They must get it from my wife. So I succumbed to the pressure. It's my own fault. But he went and talked to Dr. Gable and told him what happened. And so instead of an F, I got a C minus. Big deal. It's still not great. So the reason that I bring him up is because I then, 2 years later, went to him and asked him to write a recommendation for me for dental school. And he just looked at me like, why would I do that? He goes, you don't want me to talk about our little incident, do you? And I said, no, not really. And he goes, well, what else am I going to talk about? He goes, I got to tell the truth. So I was just like, geez, this guy really doesn't like me. But really what he was doing was teaching me, what Bill said about integrity and being on top of your game all the time and not succumbing to pressure. And he stuck with it. So when they established his retirement scholarship, I wanted to be a part of that because, not because he was my favorite, but because he really taught me something. He taught me a lesson. And the thing is, like, when you, maybe not so much, you could probably help with this about a job interview, because I've never really been on one. Yeah. But when you go for interviews for dental school, they have your transcript in front of them. And particularly UConn is like this. They have 3 people, and they have their transcript. And so we're just seeing how C's really stand out. So when they see a C minus, that's the one question they ask me is about that scientific reference class. And tell me what happened there, because all my other grades were better than that, and they saw this one. So I just said it was a tough class.
Because the life lesson, if you will.
Yeah.
So there's a life lesson in there, and we think there's an easy path. And I recall I was nominated for the Economics Honor Society, and it was, wow, I'm eligible and nominated for the Economics Honor Society. I've never gotten an academic award in my life. So I'm going, terrific, and I'm doing my internship at the Capitol, and so I learn about get my application in, and I'm a candidate, and I'm excited about this, but days go by, and because I'm commuting to Hartford, and I'm coming back, and coaching soccer for Eastern at the time as well, and so I missed the deadline, and I go in, and it was Dr. Parzik, and I go, Dr. Parzik, and it was at the induction ceremony, and I said, I missed the application period, but I'm still eligible, I'm still a qualified candidate, that didn't change my qualifications, and he looked at me and he goes, you're late, no excuse, you're late. And I was dismissed out of hand, and I share that story in the same breath that Rob shared his. Is that failure, that discipline, that reaction its impact on me was life-changing. It was absolutely life-changing in terms of there are expectations. Yes, you were considered a candidate academically. Maybe you can't read the instructions properly in terms of fulfilling your obligation. But that absolutely was a life-changing moment, and to this day, and I've thanked him, and he's no longer with us. But it was a weird. It didn't really feel like thanks at the time, but subsequently it came around to being an appreciative reaction and response, and an appropriate response.
Wonderful. One of the things that I got out of your presentations here that maybe you take it for granted, that both of you have been working 50 and 60 hours a week, perhaps more, and that there's no fear of work. And that's so important, I think, for the students to get from this conversation. But aside from the fact that the trains do not wait for people, And one of the things that I try to teach my students is the idea of punctuality is so important. You cannot have the train wait for you. The train is going to keep on going. But what I wanted you to do for our students here, give them some very, very simple things that they need to do in preparing, so to speak, to succeed in college, but also prepare themselves for the life after college. But simple ideas that they can jot down. What does it take to really, I'm not talking about becoming a high-level financial executive. I'm talking about to really be an accomplished individual in life. What does it take?
I'm never late, ever. And I tell the people that work for me that if you're 5 minutes early, you're late. Mm-hmm. So and you had mentioned that at lunch too. And it's just, I think that's just so important. I rarely miss classes too. I mean, at Eastern, I always went to class. It's funny though, in dental school, we have a note service. So I missed a lot of classes in dental school, and I regret it because you learn more just by being there and participating. Not being late, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but you know what it did for me, and I never missed class at Eastern. Those things just made a culture in my office because I kind of brought that to my office. I'm always the first one there. I get there at 6:30, 6:45. My first patient is until 7:30, but I just want people that work for me to walk in and see me standing there. And I might just be having a cup of coffee, whatever it is, going through some charts, but I'm always there. And you need to be present. And that's what I was saying before in my little beginning speech is worry about the present. Everyone always says, think about your future. That's great. It's awesome advice, but don't forget about what's present, what's around you, and you're being present, and you're showing people, what your whole being is. And so there's just a couple small things that I, just off the top of my head, that I think of.
Couple of things. I would agree. The punctuality thing, I think that's something that certainly the three of us share. Running a global organization, recognizing there's time commitments. If I'm hosting a call that has Asia on it and Europe on it and North America on it, that we need, in consideration for everyone globally, we need to begin on time, end on time. So people can either go to bed if they need to go to bed, people can go have lunch if they need to go have lunch, or if they have another commitment, or they can move on if they're in North America. So no substitute for punctuality, but I would add to that, and I spoke about the high standard, and Dr. Packus mentioned hard work. No substitute for hard work. There are people that are going to be smarter than you. There are people that are going to, and what I find is and I work with, and Rob mentioned Ivy League, and kind of the gravitas that is associated with that, and just kind of maybe a sense of awe. And I work with the best and the brightest in the industry, and I'm around that, and kind of that it has influenced me, but they may be smarter than me. But one thing I promise myself every day is they're not going to outwork me. So every day, just show up prepared to outwork them, and that will be noticed. That's one piece of practical advice. Gather the different experiences, and that's going to add to your value collectively. Gather the different experiences, both here at school, in your community at home, and that's going to build your resume. And I talked about leadership experiences as well. Positive influences in people. I'd say, we've got so many hours in a day. There's so many things we could choose to do or not choose to do. Choose to be around positive people. Choose to do and be around people that are going to endorse and support and give you confidence in terms of doing what you're doing. Don't waste time on the negative stuff. The space between your ears is just too valuable. It's not worth it. So I just move on to the positive, focus on the positive, Take the positive from all the experiences. If someone wants to talk about somebody else, they want to talk about how they got wronged on something else, in one ear, out the other, move on to the positive and just bury it and move on. And then the other thing I would add is, and I don't know that I fully appreciated this, or, at the ages that you're at. And I think Rob, again, alluded to this in his opening remarks, and that's to show appreciation and thank yous. And that's to your colleagues, your friends, your family, people that take a chance on you. Thank them. Appreciate it. If they do a good effort for you, if a server in a restaurant gives you a meal, thank you, I appreciate your help and your service. Just kindness, and just general kindness. If you're in, because the why we go to work is as much to get paid. It's the intellectual aspects. Dr. Packus has been teaching for 40 some odd years. And why does he do it? Because we're all humans and we like the social interaction associated with that. So I would say just be appreciative, stay on the positive, and thank people each and every day for their associations and what they do for you and what hopefully they're returning to you in kind. And that's my advice.
Very good. What I'd like to do now, I know it can take hours and talk about their experience and so on, but I'd like to give you a chance to ask a question. You can address it to either one of them or both of them. Who would like to stand up and ask a question? Yes, sir.
I have a question for Mr. Kelly.
Yeah.
My question is, how are future job prospects in the financial services field going to change with the further integration of big data? I guess my real question is having a finance major enough to work in the financial services network?
I think it's a great question. If I look at, the multidisciplines that it's like the Eastern community, there's a diversity. So there's a diversity of folks that work in the financial services industry. There's lawyers, there's accountants, there's history majors, there's history art majors, there's economics majors, there's public policy. So I don't know that there's a singular path depending upon what your interests are. I think it's that diversity that makes the financial service industry, I think, an attractive industry, because it's not all accountants, financial engineers of sorts, because I think that's an attractive aspect and that's a valuable aspect, but it's not the only avenue or the only channel. I think if I look at, and I've got a son that just graduated from a liberal arts school with an economics degree, and he's working for a hedge fund now. And it was a fascinating experience, because I think it endorses the multidisciplined approach of a liberal arts education. He's in a similar interview that Rob described when he was going to Tufts at dental school. He's sitting before a panel of 5 interviewers amongst 3 candidates. And the question that was asked of him wasn't related to finance, wasn't related to, well, maybe somewhat finance, but I think it was more social, had a social bent to it, was the first question, is Walmart good for America? Now, I don't know that there's a finance class, or there's an accounting class, or there's an economics class solely that's going to prepare you to answer that question. So in terms of the talent and the skills that financial services firms are looking for, I think it's varied. It's varied. And I think had my son been an accountant, he probably would have been less well prepared to answer that question. It happened to be that was the type of firm, and that was the type of skill set, and that was the type of experience that they were looking for, and that may not be for everybody. How that wraps into big data, I think, is really reflective of how the behaviors associated with big data are going to be interpreted long term with respect to the behaviors and patterns that begin to develop, and how you either assume those patterns, or what are the assumptions and the modeling that goes into developing that. So finance and statistics and all of that, the math that's going to go into that, are absolutely going to be essential. But then I think it's going to be the interpretation of that that's going to foster the kind of the value associated with that. So that's going to come from, in my view, certainly an economics background, understanding the forces in play that are causing the different data points to present themselves. What's the interrelationship of those data points? And so I think I've said a lot of words. I'm not sure if I answered your question on the big data, but I think I tried to answer your question in terms of connecting the dots between a finance degree and the financial services industry, and that I think there's paths to the financial services industry. If you want to be an investment banker, you know, that's I think a challenge that because of the rules and regulations, because of balance sheets going to be smaller and the capacity that firms are going to have to use for clients and for their firms, those opportunities are going to become, I think, fewer and fewer. The ranks are shrinking, and I think it's looking for, I think, more well-rounded skill sets. And you know, my humble opinion, that's what I look for in folks. They may have a great financial background, but I look for variety and flexibility and diversity.
Someone else. Be brave.
This is for Dr. Hacker. In regards to your volunteer work down in Ecuador, how difficult was it to set up bringing down your medical equipment and stuff there? Because you're crossing different borders. Did you encounter a lot of difficulties doing that?
What we do is bag everything up, and we have there's one airline that we use, Elon, and it's actually it's a really great run airline, and by working with one person, we're able to bag all the instruments and the supplies, and we check them through separately so they don't go through. And you'll see, if you do a mission like this, you'll see groups of people with a ton of bags, and you know they're doing a medical mission of some sort because they all have the same kind of stuff, and way too much that you wouldn't be going down there with all those clothes. So, but even having done that, each year we've gone, we'd all be sitting in the terminal, either going there or coming back, and one of our names would get called. And we'd have to go outside, and the dogs would be all around us, and we'd have to open up a bag because, you know, usually it's the oral surgery equipment. You know, if you ever had your wisdom teeth out, don't look at the tray, because that's the stuff they use to take your teeth out, and it just looks like weapons. So they make you go through that stuff. But no real problems like that. We've lost bags. Maybe they were stolen. I don't know. But we haven't lost not too much expensive stuff. And the stuff we do down there is pretty basic. You know, pulling teeth, filling holes. That's it. Yeah.
Anyone else? Go
I
ahead.
have a question for both of you. For Bill, you mentioned that you didn't know what you wanted to do, and you came here because you're curious. What was the turning point that made you, pointed you in the right direction?
Good question. I had a part-time job at Willimantic Trust Company here, so I was and I was around the financial services, so I was working part-time. And I go, well, okay, there's a lot going on. There's technology, there's operations, there's sales, and I just kind of, there was a gravitational pull at that point. And I think what really iced it for me in terms of my interest in financial services was my disinterest in politics. And the politics was, I'm going to do an internship, and this is where I feel, perhaps a passion, I don't know. I'm going to pursue it, and I love the work, and I love the people, but the process was very much rose-colored glasses came off. And the process associated with it, and I'll tell you what it was specifically. We would sit in caucus before going into session, and you would sit there, and the leadership would tell the membership how to vote. And I'm going, that's not what I learned. That's not what I learned. I didn't. And I worked for the Republican Senate, and we were in the minority, so I think there were only 14 senators, and so it was very difficult for them to kind of challenge things. But it was really, that took the rose-colored glasses off, the Willimantic Trust Company in terms of that financial experience, and that kind of escalated into summer jobs, and consequently that led to my interest in financial services. But it was hard coming out in 82 just because of the economic times.
My question's for Dr. Hacker. What made you choose Tufts over all the other prestigious dental schools you were accepted
That's a great question. I'll tell you that it wasn't the great tuition price. You know, speaking of tuition, and I'll answer your question, but one of the notes that I had there I hadn't mentioned was when I went to Eastern, the total cost was for room, board, and tuition for the year was less than what I pay for room and board for my daughter for one semester. It's unbelievable the difference in costs in universities. But anyway, Tufts they put on a great show. Okay, so what you do is you apply, and then you're granted an interview. And some schools are like the one I talked about at UConn, where you have a panel, and they kind of drill you. And it's not really fun, you know, but Tufts, you go there, you feel like you're basically accepted. Georgetown was like that too. If they gave you an interview, they were kind of selling the school to you. And so a couple things. Number one, Tufts is a very clinical school. So we're not working on patients the first year, but we're seeing patients. We're doing medical histories. We're already starting the process. Whereas a school like UConn or UPenn, they are more academic. So the first 2 years you're with the medical students. And I was already threatened by smart people, so I didn't want to be with them. So I was also better at the hands-on stuff. So like my board scores to get into dental school, I was average in academics, but I was top 1% in perceptual ability. So that I had to really look to a school that would emphasize my strengths. And so that's basically why I chose Tufts. And I'll tell you that if my daughter wants to go there, I would eagerly tell her to go because it's an awesome school. It's a really great dental school.
Yeah.
I imagine that working at a financial firm, you probably have a lot of moving parts with employee personality traits. So how do you guys manage miscommunication between those?
Great question, actually, and communication is absolutely the key. I think it ties back into one of the benefits that I think comes from a liberal arts education, is that communication and the transparency around actions is absolutely essential, particularly if we're running like a global organization and there's cultural differences. There's a certain respect and positive communication. So, and that's both written and verbal. It's just communicating clearly, succinctly, respectfully. It's honoring the other opinions that may be expressed, but ultimately it's somewhat of a democracy, but there's an ultimate arbiter. That might be me, that might be a partner of mine or a colleague of mine, but I think it comes down to clear and open communication and not having agendas and just being very forthright. I will tell you, through the financial crisis, you can talk about how communication can be misconstrued. And I know the financial crisis, and this is not political and in terms of where your proclivities may lay, but it's just in terms of the wrongs that were occurred, the losses that occurred, whether you were tied to Madoff or you had a bad investment, and some of my clients suffered through that. Well, there is no greater education with respect to what to communicate and what not to communicate or how to communicate than when you're going through a deposition. So I've spent about 70 or 80 hours being a deponent for cases being brought against my company for losses that clients had. And the biggest treasure trove, and any of you that are considering being future litigators, you'll love this, is email. And email in terms of how you communicate, what you communicate. And so we've actually now held courses in terms of what to put in an email, how to construct it, what not to put in an email. And I've instructed my children, if you don't want to read it in the front page of some journal, some newspaper, or some other event, don't write it down. Or if you're going to write it down, write it such that it can be, if it is presented in that fashion, it's clear, its meaning is clear, and it's not derogatory in any way, and it's something that you wouldn't be embarrassed to have appear on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So communication is absolutely essential, and it's clear, it's concise, and it's very direct.
Can we have one last question, because I promised it's going to be 1 hour, and then hopefully our presenters will be able to actually stay for a few minutes and mingle with the students. Yes, one last question.
This question for Mr. Kelly. I was wondering if there's any aspect of students that you really unprepared for your current.
That left me really unprepared. You know, if I were to look back, and this goes back to the gentleman's earlier question in terms of my training in finance, specifically the discipline of finance, balance sheets and being able to understand a balance sheet, was I prepared for that leaving Eastern as well prepared as I could have been? No. I think the other piece of advice that I would give for folks that are going down a business tact, and this may be germane to Rob as well, and I look at the value of the skill sets that you can acquire pre-entering the workforce. If you're thinking about what are those skill sets that I could have that are portable, I would encourage you that if you can become proficient in Access, Excel, those types of work utilities, they have immediate value to an employer in terms of if you can take data, if you can cut and slice data and make it presentable, make it meaningful, that is hugely valuable to me. I don't care if you're the war-torn veteran and you can do it, or if you're the fresh employee that can do it. It's really about utility to the group, and if you have that skill set coming in, I would say that's extremely valuable. If I could just cite, one thing, maybe put it in a contemporary context, I'd say be familiar with those and be expert in those. If you can say you're expert in those, you got a job.
Very good. Now, can we give him a nice round of applause? Okay, and thank you. Thank you so very, very much. And I know they promised to stay around just for a few minutes, and I want to thank their friends and relatives who came along, and I congratulate you for being inducted into the Fellows Program. Thank you.